welcome to the session. FDMEE can do that. That's the intended intonation of that. The presentation was written with the focus of, for the folks that are legacy Essbase users, all the integration methods that you're used to using. FDMEE opens up a new series of opportunities for you, and I kind of wanted to give you an overview of some of the capabilities of the product so that you can start to evaluate whether or not it would be useful for you in your organizations and in your projects. All right. So just a quick agenda here. Got to do the obligatory overview of the speaker and the company that they work for. I'll do that. I'll keep it brief, I promise. Give you a brief history of the product itself. Talk a little bit about some of the leading practices. I hate the word best practices. Anybody that's bought my book probably saw my little diatribe on that. So I try to stick to the idea of leading practices so as not to sledgehammer a conversation into oblivion. How can we enhance Essbase and planning integrations with FDMEE? Some common misconceptions about the product, I'm sure, similar to the EPMA ones where EPMA is dead or so-and-so competitor said it doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. There are some misconceptions about FDMEE, and I'll go over those. And then I'll, in all fairness, talk about what FDMEE doesn't do or doesn't do well. And then we'll talk a little bit about roadmap. All right? So Edgewater Ranzel, it's our 20-year anniversary this year. Full service partner. We cover all the products within the EPM stack, planning, consolidation, big data, small data. Small data is not a thing. Business intelligence. We run the gamut. Data integration is obviously the space that I live in, and that's been expanded to include master data integration. So a little bit about me. I'm the integration director at Ranzel, so I have responsibility to oversee the entire integration portfolio of projects. So anything that includes FDMEE, DRM, ODI. I do have a team of 18 people dedicated purely to those technologies. It allows us to be specialists and really attempt to deliver best-in-breed solutions. I've also got former Oracle support and development on the team, which has been incredibly useful, particularly in the journey with FDMEE. Been around the Hyperion space for about 16 years, about 10 years in consulting, 6 years as an administrator of these products. So I know what people have lived through, the pains. I try to have my team and myself deliver solutions that keep that in mind. Certified in different Oracle technologies, the primary one being HFM. I do work closely with Oracle development and product management. We meet with them a couple times a year. Talk to them regularly on the phone, via email, what's going on in the product, what needs to be enhanced, things of that nature. I'm an Oracle ace, which is something I'm happy about. I do blog, not as much as I used to, because with 18 people and trying to make sure that all those people are doing the right thing, you have a lot less free time. But I do blog at those two web addresses. And just recently published a book on FDMEE. So, all right, I told you I'd keep it brief, I did. All right, so let's talk about what FDMEE is. FDMEE, Financial Data Quality Management Enterprise Edition. But what's the history of it? So the history is Upstream was the company that launched a desktop application to load data to Hyperion Enterprise. It was actually written by a client, a person that was just tired of loading data into Hyperion Enterprise every month and having that be a painful process. If it realized they had something there, left the company he was working for, went out, created his own company. That guy's name's Tom Shea, created Upstream. Upstream WebLink introduces a web-based version of its desktop application in version 7. Don't know the year of that, but it was in the mid-2000s. Upstream gets acquired by Hyperion. They rebranded to FDM, or Financial Data Quality Management. Some people call it FDQM. Most of us call it FDM. FDQM just doesn't roll off the tongue nearly as nicely. So that was System 9. Sorry for the background noise. He's just directing some people. Chicago is very strict about their fire regulations. Please have a seat. Thank you for joining. Okay. So Oracle obviously acquires Hyperion. So along comes FDM for the ride in that. But Oracle, when they acquired Hyperion, they looked at the full product suite across all the different things, and they looked at FDM and they realized, we got something kind of cool here. We know our GLs better than anybody in the world. We've got this product that integrates data from those GLs. How can we make that better? And so what they did was they started on this journey with something called ERPI, or ERP Integrator, which allowed us to get direct connections into those general ledger systems, push the data through using some of the mapping concepts that were in FDM, and then load it into the reciprocal EPM application, whether it was HFM or Essbase. It also gave us that first cut of drill-through capability. That launched in 11.1.1.3. That's an important point that I'll expand on as we go. All right, so Oracle introduces FDMEE, Financial Data Quality Management Enterprise Edition. Notice again, the Q is dropped in 11.1.2.3, and they rebrand FDM as FDM Classic. So the reason I bulleted the 11.1.1.3 is ERPI was really the underpinnings of the application that you see today. So while 11.1.2.4 may seem like a version 2 product, it's been around for quite a long time. And Oracle then sunsets FDM, our beloved FDM Classic, in 11.1.2.4. It's dead, it's gone. It will not come back, it will not rise from the dead. All right. So a little bit of a history on the product there. So let's talk about, if we're going to be talking about integrating with Essbase and planning, what are some of the, if we think about a legacy process using load rules or any other method that you're used to doing, sound about right for nightly maintenance. I might export level 0 data out of the cube, update and restructure my outline, reload all my data, rerun aggregations. Sound reasonable? I'm not missing anything. Scheduled data loads, we have to update some substitution variables. We got to run some clear calcs. Got to load the entire data set for all entities or all companies or all whatever. Often multiple periods, a range of time periods that we're loading. We're reloading all history for the current year, so January through June. And then we got to aggregate that cube, right? Usually largely driven by MaxL. Sound reasonable for the majority of implementations, right? So as we think about FDMEE, we got to start thinking about how do we shift that design philosophy of data integration. So why are we loading only nightly? Could we get data into the cube more often? Are users wanting data in the cube more often? Why are we loading for all entities every single time? And the presentation is going to build on all of this. And I do need to upload the most recent to the website. I have not yet done that, but I promise I'll get it up as soon as the presentation's over. Why are we loading historical data every time? Why are we going back and reloading last year's data? What are we trying to do with that process? Where are those transformations occurring? Is that happening in some staging area? Am I doing it in my SQL load rules or my data load rules? Where's that happening? What's the purpose of the data warehouse if I have one? Is it purely to stage data for Essbase? Whoa. Sorry, a little click happy. Oh no, that's right. All right, so when we look at FDMEE, here's some capabilities that we want to talk about today. We've got the ability to do parallel processing, and that will start to debunk some of the myths that exist around FDMEE today, particularly around a performance expectation. The ability to execute calc scripts directly from the FDMEE interface as part of the data load cycle. Our ability to do batch automation right out of the box and schedule that directly from a web interface. No scripting required there, so nice feature. Our ability to directly integrate to data sources with pre-built adapters or without them. We've got the drill-through capabilities, and I'll talk a bit about that, I promise. The transformation capabilities of the product and what's good about it and what's powerful. Data synchronization, so if I need to move data between FDM or between HFM and planning or between an Essbase cube and an ASO reporting cube, and how FDMEE could possibly help there. And then how I can actually use Essbase load rules in the whole process of integrating using FDMEE. All right. So parallel processing, what's it mean? It's the ability to run multiple sets of data concurrently. So from a design perspective, when we went back, if you go back a couple slides and you think about the question of why are we loading the entire data set as one feed? This is where we start to challenge that somewhat, that design approach. By breaking that data set up into smaller subsets of data, we have smaller, faster data sets that we can run into the application concurrently, so multiple streams of data in. So obviously speed. Just a quick tangent. I worked at a company, Boston Scientific, and in our corporate FP&A conference room, we had 2 posters, those motivational posters, and one said, many hands, many minds, one goal, and it showed the Great Wall of China. So many hands, many minds, one goal, getting things in faster. The tangent to that story is on the right-hand side of that room, there was build bridges, not walls. The other thing that's nice about breaking your data set up into individual data streams is the idea of data security. FDMEE actually stores data in a relational repository under the covers. So if we're going to be storing that data, that means somebody can access that data and see that data that was loaded. So you've got your security that's in the Essbase model or the planning model, but you also need to think about your security within the FDMEE model and how that's going to be impacted by having one massive data set. Somebody can see one company or one legal entity in there, they can see them all if it's all one big data set. And then the other key benefit here is flexibility. So if we're talking about the close cycle, and this is an analysis tool that's being used throughout the close cycle, well, if I have a late breaking change at the last minute of the close, particularly on a quarter end, I need to flow that into the application rapidly. I don't need to reload the whole data set. I only need to reload the companies that are impacted by that change. So by breaking it up into smaller data sets, I give myself that ability. All right. And then that factors into when we get into batch processing, I can actually use parallel processing there natively out of the box. I can run things that way. All right. So calc scripts. Runtime substitution variables were introduced in 11.123 in Essbase. Anybody using them? Anybody that's not a consultant using them? All right, cool. A couple people. That's awesome. So for the rest of everybody here, runtime substitution variables, if you remember planning business rules where you get prompted to select something, it's kind of the same concept. At runtime, you're submitting or substituting in a value for what the calculation should use in that execution. Really powerful things. So they're not stored in Essbase. They're purely an in-memory thing. They allow concurrent processing for a single data script, for a single calculation script with different substitution variables being used potentially in there. So if I have a fixed statement that's fixing on the company that I need to clear, I can have one calc script that gets 2 different values from 2 different executions, and it's the same calc script. There's no confliction, where if I had a substitution variable that was actually stored in the outline, that would obviously be updated by one process, impacted by the update from the other process, and I could potentially be clearing the wrong set of data. Runtime substitution variables in memory, never stored. So here's what they look like. At the top of your script there, and I'm sorry I don't have a pointer as far as I know on this. This is brand new from the company. At the top, you've got your set runtime subvars in red, and in the curly brackets, you can name them anything you want. So I generally recommend FDMEE underscore and then whatever dimension you need to have that value update. It will not validate the syntax on the left-hand side when you try to validate the calc script. In order to validate the rest of your calc, you need to just simply set your runtime substitution variable equal to an actual value in the outline, and then validate. You get your validation, and then set it back to what it is on the left there. Powerful stuff here. All right. So FDME natively leverages these as part of the process. So before, you ran that clear, but you probably ran it before any data actually got into the application. It wasn't you had to run the clear and then the data load. FDME does the same sequential thing, but it does it as one step. It's transparent to the end user. Same thing with the aggregation. But the nice thing here is you specify that calc script right in the GUI. So you write your calc in EAS or in Notepad or wherever you want to write it, but you register that calculation script for use by FDMEE right in FDMEE. So I can run calcs before a data load and after a data load. So kind of your classic clear and aggregation or clear and calculation. I can run it before and after the check step. For those of you that don't know what the check step is, the check step allows you to pull data from Essbase after the load and compare it to a set of administrator-defined metrics to see what's the quality of my data. Is it good or bad? Kind of a classic one from an actuals perspective is my balance sheet actually balanced? So I can do those 4 tasks there. I can do them at kind of different things. I can set it for globally for the entire application. So I can say, all right, when I run this when I run a data load process, this calc script always gets invoked and always gets called regardless of where it's being run, for which data set it's being run. I can actually ratchet it down even further. I can get down into location, which is a subset of data load role, which is a further subsetting of data, and then what's called a category in FDMEE, which is akin to a scenario, as most people know it. The numbers there are the order of precedent in which these operate. So if I override my global setting with a data load role calculation, then that will take precedent over the global setting. So that means if I've got one data set that has a very specific calculation that needs to be run against it, I can actually set that up in FDMEE all natively through the web interface. FDMEE also recognizes those runtime substitution variables and allows you to dynamically start to update them based on the data set that's being loaded. So I can have anything from what FDM thinks of as a point of view. So my category time period are the 2 things there, which are broken up into year, period, and scenario. I can do it based on all the data, all the entities that are in the data set. So FDMEE has an entity dimension, same thing as like a country dimension in planning. For the data set that's being processed, clear only the entities in the data set. So again, if I start to break up my data into individual subsets of data that have 1 or 2 entities, I'm only going to clear those 1 or 2 entities when I load that individual data set. I can also leverage what's called the check entity group, where I specify a specific list of entities within the FDMEE web interface that gets cleared as part of the process and also shows up on the check report if you enable it. I have the ability to put it in what's called an integration option. So these are akin to UDAs on a member in the Essbase outline. These are UDAs for FDMEE. I can put them on the location. I can put them on the data load role. And I can also use hard-coded text. So in FDMEE, when I register my calculation, then I go in and I say, okay, what are the runtime substitution variables to be used by that calculation? Pops up on the right. I click add. I can browse out. It'll read that calc. It'll read the substitution variables that are set in that set runtime subvar section. It'll give you a list. You pick the list, and then you pick the drop-down box for the script value that you want to use for that particular thing. So these things are dynamic. It's based on the period of data being processed. So regardless of what time period is being processed, it'll pass over that specific member. You don't have to worry about some MaxL process stuff. Just update your subvars in the outline. Make sense? All right. If at any point you want to ask a question, feel free to interrupt and just shout it out. I'm pretty informal as a presenter. Batch automation, one of my favorite things. I don't think any Essbase integration should lack this. Batch automation is exactly what it sounds like. It's lights out automation of the workflow cycle. Why they called it batch, who knows, because everybody gets it confused with the idea of a batch or shell file, but there's no shell file, there's no batch file required here. It's simply maintained in the web interface. No scripting required, much different than FDM Classic where you needed scripting. It wasn't hard scripting, but you still needed it. It supports multiple types of processing. So I can do flat files, I can do direct integrations, I can even do metadata. We'll talk about metadata a little bit later. We can apply security, so people can only do certain batch executions. So if you think about a MaxL-based process, you write some bat file or some CMD file that sits out there, or a shell file if you're on Linux, that sits out on a server somewhere. You've got to find some mechanism to allow a user to execute that. Maybe you've got to set up folders with individual copies of that, so that some users can only execute some, and some users can only execute others, and it just becomes kind of a headache and a nightmare. FDMEE, through the web interface and its security model, will allow you to limit who can execute batches and which ones. So it's not an all or nothing. I can actually ratchet it down to the individual execution. Scripts can be run before and after the batches, so I can do pre-operations before the data load cycle, which is nice, and I can do things after the data load cycle. The asterisk there means that it's broken. It works, but when you run it in parallel, which I'm up here espousing the values of parallel, but when you run in parallel, the after batch script runs immediately. So it doesn't wait till the batch is actually done, it just runs, which is really great when you're trying to send somebody a status email to let them know how the batch did using a script, because the batch isn't done and it sends them an email that says nothing was processed. There's ways around it. Oracle's aware of it. They're working on a fix. So a couple ways that you can invoke them. You can do them through the FDMEE web interface. You can schedule them within FDMEE/ODI, and you can also execute them from command line. So if you've got a scheduling system and you're a Control M shop, everything that's automated has to be run through Control M, fine. There's bat files and shell files that you can use to kick off these things, no problem. So the FDMEE scheduling, you can do scheduling of a few different components here. I can schedule those batches that I talked about. I can also schedule FDMEE reports to execute on a certain time period. So for example, there's the process monitor report. So if you break your data up into multiple data sets, I've got 100 different locations now, and I need to know what's going on in the process, and I don't want to go through and run that report every month or every day or every couple of hours. I can actually set up a report batch or a report schedule that produces that report and dumps it off to a directory, on some scheduled basis, some frequency, every hour, every half hour, whatever you choose. You can also schedule the execution of FDMEE scripts. So FDMEE scripts are similar to the calc scripts that exist in Essbase. They're things that enhance what the application does. We can actually schedule those to execute now as of 11.124.100. If you're on a prior release, that's not true. All right. So there's multiple ways that you can schedule these things. So you can schedule a one-time execution. I don't know what the value of a one-time execution is, because why wouldn't you just go in and run it from the web interface? Why would you schedule it? But hey, it's there if you ever want to use it. And then we've got the idea of repeating schedules. So I can repeat hourly at a specific minute of that hour, daily, weekly, monthly, at a specific calendar day, at a specific occurrence of a day. What it does not have is any financial calendar intelligence. It doesn't know that today is a holiday per our corporate calendar, so don't run this. The other thing, the reason I have hourly highlighted there, is that if you want to set something up to run every 60 seconds, I have to set up 60 scheduled tasks. It's a one-time operation. It's kind of a pain in the neck, but it needs to be done. And again, if I'm in a shop that doesn't have a scheduling tool and I need it, then I can do it right there in the web interface, no scripting required. Pretty nice thing. I can also stop my scheduling through the web interface as well. Yes, sir.
So setting up scheduled jobs through the web interface, you want the same exact view, you want the job to be more than once an hour, you have to set up a job. The problem with that for us was, at least it's not free, you set up a job, there's no way to go in and see when it's scheduled for.
So the question was, when you set up those jobs, you can't go in and actually see the schedule. And through the FDMEE web interface, that's correct, but you can go into ODI, which is the next slide. So great transition point, thank you. He's not a plant. So when you schedule one of these things, they actually get scheduled as an ODI scenario. So you can go into ODI Studio, you can even go into ODI Console through the web, which I'm not a big fan of, but I think you can do it. But through the studio, which I like the most, you go into Operator tab, Scheduling All Schedules, blah, blah. You can see it right there. The main thing is the context and the agent name are going to vary per environment or per client deployment. But you can see it there. You double-click on it, and you can see the time that it's set up to actually run there. All right. So some direct data sourcing. These are very similar to SQL load rules. Anybody use SQL load rules today? All right, a few people. Cool. There's a couple ways to look at this. You've got some pre-built integrations. Oracle wrote these. They know their GL systems. If you remember back when I said Oracle acquired Hyperion, we know our GL is better than anybody else. Well, that was the whole underpinning of ERPI. That was the connection into EBS, to PeopleSoft, to Fusion Cloud now, JD Edwards E1, as well as SAP, new and classic GL. So varying levels of complexity regarding those different integrations. JD Edwards and SAP on the far more complex side, whereas EBS and PeopleSoft just seem to work in most instances. You can also integrate with the subledger with the pre-built integration, and these are the SAP subledgers for profit center, cost center, vendor, and customer. So when you start thinking about an Essbase application where you've got particularly product information or a customer profitability cube, analysis cube, if you have an SAP shop integrating into the customer subledger, pretty useful. You had a question, sir? Okay, so the question was ECC or BW integration, which was a good question. So it's ECC and R346 and above, and it's also SAP BW 7. In the back. The question was, does it integrate into the Oracle subledger? And I swear to God, she's not a plant either. So there is no pre-built integration into the Oracle subledger, pre-built by Oracle, but you have one of two options. You've got the open interface adapter, which allows you to write custom SQL to extract against any relational repository that exists out there. If it's relational and you can create a JDBC connection to it, you can query from it and pull data from it. Very flexible. Also a little bit of work to make that happen. You've got to write the SQL, you've got to write the script that actually executes that, all that good stuff. Again, these presentations are on the web, so you don't have to take pictures. I will upload this, I promise. Yes, Eric?
What you have on the web now is a draft. Most of the details.
So Eric apparently wasn't listening earlier when I said I promised I would upload the new one as soon as the presentation ended. Universal Data Adapter is something new in 11.124.200, where Oracle gave you somewhat of pre-built content. So what they've done is they've taken the heavy lifting of writing SQL extract scripts or SQL extract code for you, and they've bundled it into what they're calling the Universal Data Adapter. What this allows you to do is connect into a single table or view and source data from that table or view. It supports things like Teradata, DB2, SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle DB. Supports, I wasn't even looking at the screen, all of them out there. The one kind of limitation around this one, the one limitation around the Universal Data Adapter, in my opinion, is it allows you to connect only to one table or view. So if I need to do any type of union statement or anything like that, it doesn't work. Also, that table or view has to have 3 fields in it. It has to have the year, the time period number, and the time period name. Technically, you can get away with just the time period number or the time period name, but it doesn't really work as cleanly as it should. So if you're going to ask somebody to set up the table for you, drop those 3 fields on it. It's not a really onerous process for a DBA to do that and have that populated. And then you can source from there. You have filtering criteria when you do that. So I can set up a table that's got all my data for my entire company, but if I want to follow those leading practices that Tony was talking about with breaking my data set up into individual things so that I can do parallel processing in batch, I can do that and I can still filter out from that one table, give me the records only related to this one company or that one company. All right, drill through. So drill through is supported from financial reports, SmartView, and planning web forms. Please hold your questions. I know there might be some or comments. It must be initialized from a level 0 intersection across all dimensions. So when we think about this, we need to think about how we're doing drill through. If we start at the top, we've got to drill down till we get to that base level intersection, and then we can drill back through. So we can do that through linked reports if we're in FR, or when we're in SmartView, we can just kind of keep drilling down and all that good stuff. So how many people are using drill through today with FDMEE? Not a bad amount. How many people don't use FDM drill through today? So the rest of everybody, right? Why not? How many didn't know it existed? So your Oracle sales reps have done a good job educating you. How many because it's just not needed, not applicable? All right. And then the last one, how many people does that apply for? So the drill through is a little clunky in my opinion. It kind of depends on use case. In some cases, it works well. In my opinion, it's when you have a smaller dimensional model. You don't have that many dimensions you need to drill across. Where your data is actually loaded is pretty defined across a bunch of custom dimensions, and maybe it's your account entity and maybe one custom that you need to drill against. But when you start talking about a 12, 14, 16 dimensional model, it gets a little clunky, a little cumbersome. There are other options out there. There's Essbase Studio, which can give you the ability to drill from upper levels. There's something called Drill Bridge, which is a third-party component that you can purchase. And then you can always tell Oracle that we would like this to be improved. There's a couple of us in the room that work closely with Oracle and consistently tell them this, and we hope that they keep hearing us, but there's technical hurdles. But the more they hear it from customers, the more likely it is to find its way into the product. All right. So you want to see a drill through example? All right. So I didn't start in the target. I started in FDMEE because, frankly, I'm lazy. So I click on the amount, and this simulates. If I would have started from Smart View, this is similar to where I'd land. I'd click on Drill to Source, and now I'm going back into Oracle GL. So right now I'm in the general ledger. I want to get some more information about that, so I click on Activity. I get down to my journal. I want to see a little bit more there. Still in my general ledger. Okay, great. Let me keep drilling. And hey, look at that. I'm in accounts receivable. So in Oracle R12, it'll actually drop you from a drill perspective into the subledger, because at this point, Oracle General Ledger is taken over, and it allows you to continue your drill path. You're out of the Hyperion world now. This is pure Oracle GL or Oracle ERP taking over. Same thing applies for PeopleSoft and SAP. Want to see it again? Well, I usually go through it too fast. All right, so I've drilled. There I am in my general ledger. I want to get some more information on the activity. Okay, it's just this one journal entry that made up that amount. Let me figure out what's going on in that journal. Who booked this bad boy? Why? All right, still don't have enough information. I see that it was booked on, whatever posting date it was there. I'm old, I can't see that far anymore. I click Drill to Source, and there I am in my accounts receivable subledger. All right, transformation, mapping, essentially. So FDMEE, this is its core. This is what it does really, really well. The idea of taking something from a source system and transforming the value. I know that a lot of the Essbase cubes that exist out there often mirror their source systems, and that's great until you get a new source system through an acquisition. Do you retrofit them into your source system, your GL, your subledger, your data warehouse, or do you have to get another feed in from another location? Or do you have an Essbase cube that doesn't reflect your chart of accounts that's in your ERP? That's where transformation comes in and is really powerful. So we've got multiple different methods to do it. We can have explicit one-for-one maps. We can have ranges of maps. We can have a list of accounts. That's the in that allows us to map from these three things. If any one of them occur, it goes to this one member in Essbase. I also have the ability to do what we call multidimensional maps. So I can interrogate multiple segments or chart fields in the source system to determine the target. So I can look at the cost center and the account to determine which functional area it gets booked to on the financial statement. And then we have like maps where we can do wildcarding. So any account that begins with 100 gets mapped to a cash account. So you don't have to maintain all those things. And the order of operation there is from the bottom up. So explicit takes over and wins. Like is your last one. So they run in that order. So you can have overlapping definitions and overlapping transformation rules. And if explicit conflicts with the like map, explicit will take precedent. So pretty powerful stuff. It's also defined on a per dimension basis. A lot of times we'll see people thinking about a chart field or a chart string as the different segments kind of combined together and that whole thing needing to be mapped or transformed. FDMEE allows us to break that up and do mapping on a per dimension basis. So I can do my GL account, I can do my cost centers, I can do my trading partners, whatever the different dimensions or segments are. the ability to leverage other dimensions in our mapping process is also pretty powerful. So I can do it not only on the source side, so I can look at my source GL or my source cost center and my source GL account, but I can also do it on the target side. So I can look at the mapped account and figure out whether or not I want something to go to one place or another based on the account that's been mapped in FDM. Because I might have 1,000 accounts that collapse into one account in Essbase. And I don't want to set up a bunch of maps that say, well, this account or this 1,000 accounts with this cost center go here, otherwise it goes there. I can do it based on the target as well. So I've got a lot of flexibility. We can also share our mapping. So if you think about a Essbase load rule, I can't really do that. I've got one Essbase load rule, and whatever transformation I put into there, I've got to replicate that into another load rule. Sure, I could create a copy of that load rule and tweak it and all that stuff, but I've got to maintain that logic in two places. FDMEE, I can actually share that. And then the other nice thing that occurs here, this isn't as applicable for Essbase. I'll get to you in 1 second, I see you. The other thing that's not as applicable here for Essbase, but sometimes can be, is, hey, who changed that map? What was it before they changed it to what it is now? Having that auditability in the database is actually pretty useful, not so much from an audit perspective, but from a debugging perspective when data's living in the wrong place. Sorry, you had a question? I knew the question was going to come. It's a great question. So the question was, can you share a single dimension, or is it the maps that have been defined across all dimensions being shared? Unfortunately, it's the latter. We have talked to Oracle and told them that we would very much like to see an individual dimension being able to be shared. They've got a whole list of things that we've asked them to do, so that's on there. I don't know how much toward the top it really is right now, given some of the other priorities, but it's on the list. All right. So data synchronization, the ability to move data natively within the EPM suite and even outside of the EPM suite. So I can take data from an Essbase cube and I can actually push it back into PeopleSoft or EBS. Pretty nice feature. It leverages all the same workflow as an inbound data integration, which means if for anybody that's familiar with FDM or FDMEE today, you can use import scripts, maps, all of those different things can be done. So if I've got an ASO reporting cube that aggregates data up and I don't want to manage that through partitions or X writes or something like that, I can set up a data synchronization within FDMEE, use the maps, collapse all of those accounts into a single account, and run the data through that way. All right. I can even move data within a single cube. So if I want to set up a process that isn't end user driven, or it is end user driven and not so much systematic, I could say, all right, you're done with your actuals, you need to move them into the forecast scenario, and you want that to be controlled by you. Great, do it through FDMEE. I mean, obviously there's other techniques, business roles would make a lot of sense in planning on a form or something like that, but you could also do it through FDMEE, so just another option for you. All right. As I said before, we can write the data back, so you finish your budget and planning and you want to push it back into EBS because you've got cost center managers that you don't want to license in planning, or they just don't understand planning, or you're just terrified of letting them touch the system because of what they might do to it or ask of it. You can push that data back into EBS and let them run their cost center report actual to budget variance there. The nice thing about this is when I'm moving this data, that extract parameter, those things that I want to say, okay, pull this data out of one Essbase cube or one planning repository and move it over to the other, is maintained right on the web. And I use all of my same functions, so my @relative, my @children, my @descendants, all those different things I can continue to use and right there on the web interface. I get a little pick box just like I do in SmartView or any other place. All right? Yes, sir. So the question was, is the synchronization real-time or do you define a schedule? It is not real-time, unfortunately. So the other last thing here, quickly before we get into some of the other cool stuff in the thing here, is Essbase load rules. FDMEE actually generates a load rule whenever it loads data into Essbase. That means you get an ERR file. If whenever you're loading data instead of one record being rejected. Has two ways of doing it. It can either create the flat file and then create a load rule that interprets that flat file, or it will also build a SQL load rule. Obviously, you want to use the latter from a performance perspective. There's no disk I/O writing a flat file out and then loading it into Essbase. Does it on the fly, deletes it and recreates it every time, which means don't go in and try to modify the one that it creates for you, because the next time you run your integration, guess what? All your changes got blown away. But if you have something that you want to do in that load rule, there's some additional thing that you want to do. Maybe you don't want to map all the dimensions. You want to put them in a header. You can create your own custom Essbase load rule, specify it in the integration, and then FDMEE will use that integration as part of the data load cycle. All right. They're generally set up at the application level, similar to the calc scripts, but we can also override those at the data load rule level. This is the FDMEE data load rule. It's great that they're naming all their components the same thing across these different applications. That's not confusing, right? All right, so doing some more with FDMEE, some custom solutions that we've done, just kind of highlight some of the cool things that you can do here. I had 3 up there: Essbase Enhanced Validate, Smart Calculations, and Smart List. Smart List is cut out for a reason. So Essbase Enhanced Validate, we modeled it after what's called the HFM intersection validation report, and that allows us to check where we're loading data. Is it actually a valid level 0 member in the outline? Do it for a couple of different reasons. Anyone that was in my session, sorry this is repetitive, but I see a lot of new faces, so I'm going to say it again. When you go to the load data portion of the FDME workflow, if you've set up the clear calc, it's going to try to run a clear calc, and it's going to try to fix based on those runtime substitution variables that you've set. So let's say, for example, you are fixing on all the cost centers. That's your entity. You've decided that you're going to fix on that. And you're constantly adding cost centers to your GL. You've got some pass-through mapping. So it got mapped through because your map just simply says, take whatever the GL code was, append CC underscore to the beginning, and push that through as the cost center. Well, somebody added that into the GL. They booked a record to it. The maps picked it up, they transformed it, but somebody forgot to update the metadata in the planning application or the Essbase application, and they don't own DRM. So before anybody says, what about DRM? You don't own DRM. So then FDM invokes the calc to run the clear, and it fixes on a member that doesn't exist. What happens when you fix on a member that doesn't exist? Bombs, right? Well, it bombs in a spectacular way that gets written in a spectacular way to the log file, and doesn't mean anything to anybody without recursing through hundreds or thousands of lines of log entry. It's really kind of a pain in the neck. The other thing is when you have an invalid member in your data set, if you've gotten past the clear by some magic reason because you're not fixing on it and you go to load it, every record that has that member in it bombs, gets written to the log, and you've got to go through hundreds or thousands of error lines of the data to try to figure out the unique members that caused that failure. We wrote this in order to prevent that from happening. So it happens at the validate step. So there's 4 portions of the workflow process: import, validate, export, and check. Validate is, hey, is everything mapped? And then we say, okay, everything's mapped, but is it mapped to a member that actually exists in the outline as a level 0 member? And what it does is it'll present you a list of the unique members across each dimension that are going to fail to load to the Essbase application because they don't exist in the outline. So instead of having to go through hundreds or thousands of lines and trying to find all the unique members that are causing the failure, you get a nice pretty report there that shows you just those things, written against the Essbase JAPI. So it's fairly performant. We recently did an implementation at a customer that had hundreds of different locations that we were loading, and so we had to build some additional performance intelligence here of when to run that, because we're actually reading against the outline and all that stuff. So that's kind of been built into our framework. The idea of smart calculations. So, like that, the flow chart, does it move? No. Should it? Yes or no? Excuse me. So the idea of running calc scripts intelligently, if you're taking any of the advice I've given, which is to break up your data set into smaller portions, you don't want to run an aggregation calc after every load, most likely, because you're unnecessarily aggregating data, right? Because If you've got 10 different companies loading data in parallel, I've run the data up the hierarchies. I load another data set. That data is stale now. I've got to run the data up again, all that good stuff. So when you think about the process, when you're running a batch process, for example, you just want to run that ag calc once after all the data has been loaded for that particular execution of the batch. Excuse me. So you could also run it. That's a speaker worst case scenario. That's awful. We might also want to only aggregate the cube if all the data has been loaded successfully. So I might have 10 locations out there. If 9 of them get in and 1's missing, does the data at the top mean anything? Is it going to be relevant for people? Some people might say yes, and others might say no. But we can intelligently detect that and determine whether or not to run one aggregation calc at the end. We might need to run an ag before a data synchronization, right? So again, like the Essbase Enhanced Validate, this is designed for performance. So the whole idea is run only the calculations you need to run. Don't run unnecessary calcs. We can leverage the runtime substitution variables here, so you don't have to worry about maintaining MaxL processes that update subvars in the outline. All right, so let's talk about some common misconceptions here. Data volumes. Anybody ever heard things like FDMEE can't handle 500,000 or 1 million rows or more than that? That's simply false. It's not true. FDMEE in particular can handle that data volume pretty easily. It's a 64-bit application. You can throw a bunch of RAM at it. You can throw 6, 8, whatever the amount of memory you have on your server, you can start to throw that toward this application. Multi-period processing, another one I've heard a lot. FDMEE for processing files with multiple periods of data is unruly. Anybody heard that or believe that? That was true in FDM Classic. FDMEE, it is certainly better. I wouldn't say it's completely false, that statement. It's dramatically improved the ability to do multiple periods. Import formats allow us a lot more capability than what we had in FDM Classic. It's better, and it's continuing to get better. And there is a bug, unfortunately, when you run multiple time periods of data. When you run a clear calc, it will only run that clear calc once, and if you're running it for the point of view period, it will only run it for the first period in the range of data that you execute. So if you run January through June, your clear calc with your runtime subvar is only going to do January. It's not going to clear February, March, April, or May, or June. So Oracle's aware of that one. They're working on that one. All right. So what does... Yes, sir. Yeah. There is a workaround for that one. You can create a process that runs it in a loop. So you're doing individual time periods in a loop. That's pretty much that, or you could try to play with your calc scripts a little bit and do something creative there. And there's always a workaround. It kind of depends on situation by situation. All right, so what does FDMEE not do well? Metadata integration, planning integration, textual information, multiple data columns, meaning I've got my accounts or measures across the column, and then performance. So let me actually talk to those. Metadata integration. FDMEE has the ability to integrate metadata from EBS or PeopleSoft. It doesn't do a great job, in my opinion, because it doesn't reflect any enrichment that you've done to that master data after the fact. So if you run it once and you load your cost center dimension in and you've put some UD fields on and made some hierarchy changes and all that stuff, the next time you run it, those things get overwritten with what was sourced from the general ledger of the next execution. So in my mind, not a great use case. Planning integration, there is no planning integration as of right now, so it's not very good at it. Same thing with textual information. We can't load textual data through FDMEE right now. So the idea of smart list or anything like that. Multiple data columns, it doesn't handle that without us having to write some type of script that transposes that file. And then performance, it's never going to be as fast as an Essbase load rule. But what you really need to ask yourself is, in everything that you've done to get data ready for an Essbase load rule, you've got to realize that if you put that into FDMEE and you take away that pre-work, you've just simply shifted the responsibility of that action And now you have potentially more control over it, more ability to modify that as the business changes and as requirements change. So there's obviously a cost to it. There's some trade-off, but you can tune these things. You can tune the database. You can tune the application, the amount of memory. You can look at how the integration is designed to get better performance. All right, so Oracle Safe Harbor. Anybody that has alcohol, take a shot. If you were here at the symposium on Sunday, that was their joke. So the question was, they have a batch set up in, I believe, FDM Classic, correct? In FDM Classic that loads into HFM and planning. Is that still capable? Absolutely. FDMEE is better than FDM Classic was at loading into those two things. Oracle Safe Harbor just simply says, whatever I'm about to share with you is subject to change. Don't make any decisions based on what you hear right now. So coming soonish, planning integration. So I said it wasn't very good at it because it doesn't do it, but it's coming. We'll be able to actually integrate with the planning repository and talk to it through the API. So things like what the outline load utility can do, we will be able to do. So that's big. That really opens up a lot more opportunity on the Essbase and planning integrations. We can do a lot more there. We'll also be able to integrate textual information. So not only data, but textual data. That's a big change as well. Will give us a lot more capability to do different things. We will be able to do multi-data columns. So if you've got units and amounts as your columns, you'll be able to read that file natively. No additional work required to do that, and run it through FDMEE. It'll also be smart enough to dynamically assign, potentially, say you associate it to your account dimension. It could read the header. If your header says cells and your other header says units, your row will say cells and your second row will say units. They're also working on performance at Oracle. So the ability to bypass a lot of the things that FDMEE does today to support auditing or other things. Fine, you don't want it, you don't need it. Let's bypass all those features and functions and just use FDMEE as a vehicle to load data. Why would they want to do that? Well, when you think about it from a customer perspective, consultants, we're good at technology, we're good at developing really optimal solutions, and sometimes that means we're going to develop across different technologies. But when it comes to supporting that from a customer perspective, you might not be able to have somebody that's versed in SQL load rules, FDMEE, ODI, DRM, all these different things. So by giving you the option to just pump data through FDMEE and use it as just a pass-through, it gives you the ability to not necessarily have to lean on other things like ODI or load rules themselves. And then, shockingly, more cloud integration is coming. So timeline on all this, planning integration, textual information, multiple data columns, cloud in the July-ish timeframe, we were told, and then on-prem soon thereafter. Performance and more cloud integration coming. I don't know the date. Shameless plug, there's my book. Anybody that's written it or anybody that's gotten it and has a copy with them, come by the booth. I'm happy to sign it. Otherwise, if you get a copy, thanks for the support. Appreciate it. So Q&A, questions, other sessions that we have. I'm presenting tomorrow with Francisco at Lucky Me, 4:30 to 5:30, right before the event. So I know that one will be great. But feel free to swing by. Francisco, if you don't know him, is another FDM-focused person. So you had a question? I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? So the question was, do you need to be on 11.124 in order to get the what's coming? Yes, it will not be backported to the 11.123 release. So when it does get released as a patch set, it will be for 2.4. Other questions? Yes, sir. So the question was the check report that I briefly mentioned. How is that check report built? Is it scripting based or is it UI based? It is UI based. So you have the ability in there to display key metrics from the data target, as well as test those values, and you maintain all that through the web interface. You do have the ability to enrich it with scripting, but if you just want the basic functionality, and it works pretty cleanly 95% of the time, all UI based. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you coming.